A lot of you know Rebecca is a neonatologist at the University of Michigan and is a QI guru. She's dressed appropriately, similar to the Yankees. Michigan is having a bit of a tough season, but there's still a lot of room. It's still early. The VCS is unpredictable. So thank you, Rebecca.
All right, wonderful. And I'll echo what Dimitri's saying is that I think a lot of, I know this isn't on yet. Do I have to turn it on? I like to turn it on. There we go. See, common sense. So a lot of what was happening at our table is people, I think our quality improvement is so common sense in some aspects. So your brain is already moving a few steps ahead and, okay, how does this actually work and where am I going? And I think to me, when I first heard of driver diagrams, I thought this was going to be, it's just another thing I have to do. But what I've really learned to, I guess, embrace about a driver diagram is if you're at all a visual learner, it is your map. So it is all these things that you're talking about, and the more time you take with your team to actually break it apart and think about how all of these different factors are going to come together to impact that aim, you actually have a one-page map to how you're going to achieve your project. And so I'm just going to walk you through how we get there. I have nothing to disclose. So we're really going to talk about how this is a role in, as a quality improvement tool, understand what the anatomy of a driver diagram is, and then finally work on developing a driver diagram together. So where does this concept come from? So the system of profound knowledge is, for any of you that have read Deming's work, is it is a management approach to improvement that Dr. Deming developed. He was a statistician and engineer, and it was really important in the post-World War II revival of some of the efforts in Japan, especially around Toyota and things like that. So he was a big quality improvement guru. And he developed this system of profound knowledge that has these 4 interdependent principles. So when we look at these principles, I think 3 of them are very self-explanatory. You have to understand the system that you work, whether that's your unit, whether that's the car manufacturing company. You have to understand what are the components of your system. You have to understand what the variation is in your system. So what can you rationally expect from your system? What's that performance going to look like with your current system? What things are going to be expected just based on how it works. Psychology, we all know that quality improvement is a lot of psychology. How are you going to get people to change? What motivates people? Why are people there doing their job? So we can all, as we think about our quality improvement work, think, okay, those 3 things make sense. I got to have a good feel for those. And this 4th thing, I was like a theory of knowledge. Like knowledge, I'm like, okay, you develop theories. I had really hard time grasping this. So when I was reading his work, he actually gives this great description about this rooster. And I think his name is in the book Chanticleer or something like that. So anyways, this rooster wakes up every day and he crows and he musters all of his might and he flaps his wings and he crows, and what happens every morning? The sun comes up. So he thinks, this is my role. When I crow and when I do this, the sun comes up. But one day he overslept and didn't get up and the sun still came up. And so his entire theory needed revision. So that's your theory of knowledge. And when we really think about it, we all have a theory as to why we think things are the way they are, and that is the theory of knowledge. So why does this incorporate into driver diagrams? The driver diagram, in the end, is really the visual representation of your shared theory of knowledge. So as you were how do you get everybody on that same page? That's what this driver diagram is it's thinking about, I think this impacts this, which impacts this, which impacts this. And in the end, what can you do with that? You can test it and see, is your theory of knowledge correct? Is the sun going to come up if I do circles around the block? What is it that's actually going to make that happen because crowing didn't work? And it's built by your team of stakeholders. So it's not just you thinking about what are these key elements that are going to go into it. So that's kind of that 4th element of what is a management approach to improvement. It can be very simple. I will tell you, depending on the complexity of your problem, it can get really murky and ugly and really just, what do you do? But what I would actually advertise is then you have too many problems on your piece of paper and you need to divide them out because this is supposed to be simple, and we'll go through a very simple example. It keeps you and your team on track. So at our team, we were talking about, okay, if we're going to reduce pneumothorax, I've identified this and this and this as different factors. Well, what if I've done this and I haven't seen the improvement? I know what else. Or to the unit, it seems like so much change is happening. It is. These are the 4 things we're doing to align with this. So it does keep your team, whether it's your working team or your unit context, on track. It also, if you had to do an A3 or some of these other quality improvement tools that your leadership wants to see, here's my one page. It includes my aims, where I'm going, when I'm going to get there, and all the things I need to do in order to get there, and how I'm going to measure that it's an improvement. So that can be very helpful for management. And again, it aligns these ideas to your bigger goal, which sometimes get lost. So I think honestly, and you'll see for those that have been any quality improvement talks, we give a lot of the same examples, and this is probably one of the most common used because we all can get it at some level. So if our aim is to lose 10 pounds, I'm going to be healthy, that's my big broad in there, and I'm going to do this by December. What are the two things, what's going to drive that change? It's up there, we can check. Oh, perfect, right? So I've got to monitor my calories in and my calories out, okay? You may in your work word it differently, but if you really sat down and thought about it, what are the two things that are going to drive that change? So those are your key drivers. What are those things that are going to drive that change? So in the anatomy of this, one of the important things I think is to think of where are the arrows going. These things are impacting your aim, okay? It's not necessarily going that direction, but what are those big things that are going to affect your aim? From there, your secondary drivers are things that breaks down into then. So how would you change calories in? So what affects calories in? And I'm sorry, it doesn't show up too well here. Yeah, so how much, are you doing low-calorie foods? Have you, let's see what else I put up there. Limit your daily intake, limiting alcohol, calories out. You can increase exercise. You can do all of these different things that can affect those primary drivers. And that's then where you get into those change ideas, okay? So if I say limit alcohol or reduce calories in, that's not a change concept, right? That's still kind of big and broad and nebulous. But we know if I reduce, eating a lot of food, I'm going to reduce my calories in, I'm going to eventually lose that weight. But my change idea is how I'm going to do that. And that's where your context comes into play. So, I may say, what did I put up here? I'm going to use a calorie tracking app, and I'm going to make sure I'm doing all those things. That's my specific change idea. But notice how far away this has come. So I've already mapped out how these things piece into this ultimate aim. And then what I like to do on my driver diagrams, which you may or may not see if you look at the literature, is that's then where I add in my process measures, which Heather will go over. But I want people to be able to understand, why am I measuring days per week that I hit these calories? Or why am I measuring how many days of the week I hit 10,000 steps? But it's because I want people to be able to understand how that is a measure that's hopefully going to get me to my goal. And so I find it very helpful to put my measures up here so that it aligns the entire picture. So that's in essence an anatomy of a driver diagram. There's a couple key points about that, which I'll skip ahead to, hold on. So tips. So there's not a right diagram, and I'm going to go over a couple examples. It's really just good enough, and it honestly should morph over the time that you're using it, because the first time you're drafting a driver diagram, you're not going to exactly know all the pieces that are there. So it's not write it and done. It should continue to grow with you as you develop your project. Sometimes you won't have secondary drivers. If it's getting too complicated, you probably need multiple diagrams. And I think there was a great example of we're trying to do the small baby team, it's Arica, right? Trying to do a small baby team, and then we're trying to fix the golden hour, and we're trying to do, I bet there's a lot of tenets that come into that. And so when you start building these things, you say, well, what is the small baby team trying to do? So maybe that's where your aim comes in, and you're thinking, okay, we're really trying to improve survival without morbidity. We're going to do that with a small baby team, a golden hour team, And those are your drivers, your key drivers that are going to impact that goal. But if you really think about it, that's pretty big. And then you're going to have secondary drivers. Okay, well, what is that small baby team? That thing could become so gnarly and ugly but you may want one just for that big picture. And then for each of these individual projects, like your golden hour team, you have your own separate one that starts with, we're going to improve your golden hour, time to resuscitation from X to Y, and that's where you break it all down. So the key of this is that if you ever feel like you're making this monster, you probably need multiple of them, or you're really taking on a gigantic project. This should be very finite things. So let's go back to a couple examples. I love this one. This one is very simplistic, published in Pediatrics in 2016. This group wanted to look at NEC. They have a beautiful smart aim. They have 4 key drivers. We're going to use human milk. We're going to do a transfusion guideline. We're going to restrict feeds when appropriate, and Zantac. Whether or not you agree with them or not, those are what they chose. And then they have their exact design changes that they do. So sometimes people get, okay, well, is it a driver or is it a change idea? I think I always go back to, if I say I'm going to reduce calories, it doesn't tell you how I'm going to do it. And that's the distinction. This is their specific change idea that they're doing. We're going to specifically have this protocol for when we're going to feed around transfusions. It's a very specific thing. And sometimes it doesn't fit perfectly. Just like you were saying, how do you fit everything into a smart aim model? Sometimes it does get a little fuzzy. Well, it's kind of like a change idea, kind of like a driver. Again, don't be too stressed about it. But your drivers is what you really should think about. What are the big ideas that are going to move that aim? Here's another example, and this gets back to kind of that small baby unit, really big. So this comes up from the pediatrics group, where they looked at this huge 100,000 babies campaign. And so they're thinking really high level of, what are the things we need to do to improve the survival and outcome of these babies. So these are huge, high level. So they're looking at key drivers, nutrition, well, of course, right? So this is a very high level. Now, if they're going to focus on nutrition, I guarantee they're going to have a driver diagram that's very specific and is going to get down to how they're going to improve in nutrition and get there. So again, there's multiple tiers to this in multiple ways, but you can look at this and say, I completely understand the 100,000 babies campaign. These are the things, the process changes they're going to do. When they do those, they're fixing those, and I'm going to get to my outcome. So it's on one paper. I mean, that kind of sums up their whole approach to how they're going to get there. You need more detail, you can find it, but it at least aligns it visually to what they're going to do and what their projects was. And that was by Dan Ellsbury in 2016. So how do you get there? So there are different ways to do this. I find this to be the most helpful. I think one of my fellows did it on a whiteboard the other day. But you guys all have at your table some sticky notes. And so I think what's helpful is getting your team together. We're going to ask you guys to do this together, even though it may not be your team. Pick a project or two, or you can use, I have a specific example. And what you really want to do is brainstorm the things you need to do and achieve in order to make an improvement. So you're just going to start jotting them down individually on these note cards, after the Post-it notes. After you get those, then you try to cluster them together to see, are there any common links? Some of them are going to be the same because we're different people, but are there common links? Are there the calories in, calories out type of groups that you can go from? From there, you can say, okay, we need to really expand on this group and make this a little bit more robust. And then the goal is you can take these things and link them back into how they are overall going to affect your aim. And to me, this is one of the easiest ways to develop a driver diagram. Sometimes you are starting, though, as it says at the very bottom, with the project and working backwards. Sometimes you're handed the project. Sometimes the project's already been at a stage of development and you're working backwards, and that's fine. The IHI model says as long as you're getting all the steps, sometimes you don't always start with what you're trying to accomplish. You kind of already know the project. So we're going to do this exercise together, and the facilitators at the table should be able to help you. If you have a different way to accomplish it, I think that's great, and feel free to share. But I think this is a great way of how do you get a whole team to basically see how these drivers go together. All right, so following with that thermoregulation, I did put up this smart aim. If a table doesn't want to use one of their own examples, feel free to use something if somebody has a smart aim and really wants to work on it together. But we're going to spend about 5 to 10 minutes together building a driver diagram.